We're just 2 months away from the world premiere of The Shoes for the Santa Nino, a new opera by Stephen Paulus. Peggy Pond Church gave us the story of Julianita, an intrepid young girl who on one magical night in the company of the Santa Nino reminds us all there are miracles all around us. Joining me in a conversation about this exciting new production is Brian J. Bustos, the production designer. Hello, Brian.
Hello.
Well, before we talk a whole lot more about Shoes for the Santa Nino, let's talk about you and the Santa Fe Opera.
Yes.
And I know that you credit the Santa Fe Opera as having been an influence on your career. And I also know you attended your first opera with your family at age 9. Do you remember what production that was?
I believe that it was A Marriage of Figaro. And there's those early years, they all kind of meshed together. Didn't know what I was exactly seeing, kind of was sitting, you know, sit there in the audience, and for the most part, I probably was getting fidgety, and, you know, the first time sitting and watching a 3-hour show, and it's an opera, which is a whole different way of that you watch theater. So I definitely remember there being a Marriage of Figaro very early on. So I think that that probably was about it.
What a nice introduction to the world of opera.
Yeah, and it's still one of my favorites, so there's nothing wrong with that, I guess.
You also have talked about coming to the opera later on in your school years and kind of working the system a little bit. Can you tell me about that?
This is actually kind of fantastic because my best friend and I in high school, when we were finally got our own cars and were able to drive, we would live for the nights that we knew that there was an opera that we wanted to see or that we liked or something we'd never seen before. And we would come sit outside in the parking lot and listen to the opera for the first act, and we would get people as they were leaving at intermission to give us their tickets to their seats so we could sit for the second act. And so we technically would sneak into the opera, and it kind of, it was great because you saw the same production many different times.
Then you came to work at the Santa Fe Opera, and what was that process? How did you come to be employed here?
I was an undergrad at the University of New Mexico, and I had spent the summer prior in Williamstown, Massachusetts, working, which is a play summer stock theater that brings in a lot of New York-based designers, directors, and actors. And I always knew that I wanted to work at the opera. Since I mean, in high school, I was determined that I was going to find a job somewhere here. And it wasn't necessarily in design. I thought, you know, it could be anywhere in production, or, you know, I just didn't know. And so I applied to be an apprentice. At the end of my first summer, this I distinctly remember, David Burke and I were driving to costume storage.
And David Burke runs the costume department here at the opera. Mm-hmm.
I remember saying to him, I was like, I would love to come back as an apprentice again next year. And he's like, well, why don't we talk about you coming back as a shopper? And so I came back as a shopper, which in the structure here basically works as an assistant to the assistant designer. And then my last 3 seasons, I was an assistant, and I assisted on Mitridate, Rigoletto, and Eugene Onegin. And
David Burke started taking a bigger role in your professional development.
Yes.
Yeah, I think you credit him a lot
with.
with.
David Burke is the person that kind of taught me everything about being a designer, a person, a professional, because I was young and I didn't have the same experience that a lot of other kids had coming into the opera of being around big theater companies and being in cities where you could go see, you know, big touring productions. And he really is the person that kind of paved the way for me to decide what I wanted to do.
So shall we talk about Shoes and
Sure.
how you've come back to us? So
Sure.
Will you tell me how you first learned about the project?
I got a message from Kathleen Clausen, the director, and she said that she was doing an opera in Santa Fe. It was very vague. She sent me an email and she's like, I'm doing this opera in Santa Fe. It's being co-produced, being commissioned by the University of New Mexico, right. Produced by the Santa Fe Opera. And because we know of your history with both places, we would love to talk to you about designing it. And immediately I wrote back and said, count me in. I mean, I didn't even know what it was. I didn't care. I was like, it has always been the dream that I wanted to design a show at Santa Fe Opera. And so this was a great way for me to kind of get into, you know, showing my work no longer as the young kid that was learning here, but actually now is a professional.
So then you came out to Santa Fe this summer and met with Kathleen and Paul Horpedahl, the production director here at the opera, and I think there was actually a bit of a surprise.
They asked me if I would also be interested in doing the scenery for the show as well as the costumes, which I consider myself a designer and I should be able to design everything, but primarily a costume designer. And it was the moment where I said, sure, like, I don't know what I'm getting into. Like, I don't even know what this show is yet. Like, I hadn't heard any music. I had read the book and the libretto and just kind of, and got a production calendar. And then as we started talking about the production, the great thing is that it's a children's pageant. It needs to look like it's all been done in the same place. And I took it on, and it was actually, has been so far for me, the most exciting part of the project, because clothes I know. The scenery, I handed drawings over and said, this is what I want it to look like.
So what attracted you most to this project, and what got you most excited when you started digging in deeper?
And the most exciting part for me was the affiliation with the New Mexico Centennial, and the fact that it's an important part of the state history. And this opera is going to also become a very important part of that as well. And then we're bringing in and incorporating all of New Mexico into it. That's what excited me, as well as reading the book and the story of the Santa Nino. And growing up in Santa Fe, you always knew what the story of the Santa Nino was, and you always went to Chimayo, and you always went to the church. But we're actually allowing the audience to go through the journey with the Santa Nino and go through the journey of New Mexico and New Mexico cultures and history. So
and there are a lot of children on the stage. So this is a large chorus. There are two children soloists.
Yes.
And 2 adult soloists. So
yeah, well, double cast children soloists, so there's 4. Okay. Yeah, and 2 adults, and just a delightful group of kids. I mean, they're broken up into 3 sections of I think it's called the advanced, the intermediate, and the primary.
Of the UNM Children's Chorus.
And the advanced kids are actually extremely, extremely talented performers and professionals. And I think that the great thing is that then they're showing the younger kids how to behave and how to work. But they came in for their fittings, and they did their fittings like I would get with a normal actor, and it was kind of amazing to see that. And then you get the little kids, which they're just excited, and I'm excited for them, because they're 6-year-old kids running around, and they've never had to wear costumes before besides Halloween.
The impetus behind the piece and the commission was to write a piece for children's chorus, which there's a real dearth of those types of works in the repertoire, the operatic repertoire, as you've probably encountered as well. And we've produced the Noah's Flood by Benjamin Britten, which is a wonderful piece. And I think it's wonderful in that children are primarily the performers, and they have these really simple musical lines that when they can have mastery over, and they feel real confident in performing their piece. And when they all come together, there's this real magnificent sound that they're kind of taken by surprise, like, wow, we did that together. And so that was my inspiration, actually, was that piece in particular. And knowing that this piece was for children and for children's chorus, I tried to create opportunities for that to happen. And the story, Peggy Pond Church created these 2 characters, Julianita and the Santo Nino, and they have to be children. So we were talking a little bit before about the role of audience in a performance, and what do you want audiences to take away from the Santo Nino, or choose for Santo Nino when they see it?
My big thing about the Santa Fe Opera and audience in my history is that I don't want this art form to die. I want kids to be able to see it, enjoy it. I don't necessarily think that they should all come work in it. I think that they should enjoy it and respect the art. And growing up in a city that you have a caliber of opera that you have here, you don't get that in most other cities. So they have something very special, and they have to learn to appreciate it. What I really wanted to do is make it as relatable to the audience that is going to be seeing it, so that they can take something away from it. And even if it was I love the masks, or I love, you know, something about it that they'll remember. They have a memory from an opera, and then they can develop more memories on top of that. So I think that that's the most important part of the work that I think that we're doing.
Thank you very much, Brian.
Thank you.
Shoes for the Santa Nino, commissioned by the University of New Mexico and co-presented with the Santa Fe Opera, will premiere at the National Hispanic Cultural Center in Albuquerque on December 16th with performances through that weekend. And then it travels to Santa Fe as part of the centennial celebration of New Mexico statehood, the weekend of January 6th at the Lindsay Center for Performing Arts. Tickets are free of charge and will be available at each venue's box office beginning in November.